So Steve, thanks for giving up your time all the way from California. I know we sent the questions ahead, so I hope they're okay, but we're just going to get straight into it if that's okay. Well, the first question is relates to how we've actually titled this event. And we've called the event Not So Hard to Reach, because for me, it's just so clear that that is an outdated phrase, and it implies that the audience has made themselves hard to reach rather than the organizations failing to make themselves, the organization accessible and the organization relevant. And what do you think about that? And what's the role of language in particular?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ben. And just want to thank you and the team at Claremont for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this session. I think what you do is fantastic, and I'm glad to be of support. I mean, I think this whole kind of hard to reach stuff all comes from, negative connotations. And like you say, it's all about language and the poor use of language. And so I think one of the things that I've learned actually spending time working in the US is that you can turn these things on their head, right? So, if you're talking about like hard to reach, you could reframe it and say, undiscovered talent, right? Or talent with promise, I mean, I'm pinching stuff in here, like friends who work in the space of supporting people who are leaving prison in the United States, especially in California. Now the common language to refer to people who are leaving prison is returning citizens, right? Wow. Because they are citizens, they are still citizens, and they are simply returning. They're returning from where they've been. And so what that does is, you don't talk about ex-prison, you don't talk about ex-offenders, you don't talk about prisoners, you just talk about people who are returning citizens. And so I think what that says to me about hard to reach and about the way we use language is that we need to be really intentional about setting up a vernacular and a language for so-called groups who are not in our mainstream view, so that the language is respectful, is inclusive, and is glass half full. Another one that I've seen is how we talk about, I actually despise this word of NEETs, not in employment, education, and training. Absolute shocking use of the English language. And again, I've seen the use of youth with promise, or young people with promise, right? I mean, it's just kind of changing it and just saying, look, every young person has some promise. Maybe the mainstream system that we work in hasn't been able to realize that promise, and so we need to do some extra work or some other work. But I think we just need to be really intentional around language. And as a comms expert, I think you can probably help with that.
Well, you know what? I'm just almost kicking myself that I haven't been beating the drum on what you just said for the last few years now. And it's funny, is it coming from over the pond? They just seem so very naturally optimistic in the way that they put things. I mean, it seems obvious now that for this type of challenge that we should look to America for the right language. I mean, is it simply because they're optimistic, or are they just ahead on these things? What's going on over there?
I think you're right. I think what I've noticed, and obviously America is a different place. It's 50 different states, right? So California is very different to Texas, and so California is particularly positive and optimistic, as you say. But I think what I have noticed is that there is a difference. Is that yes, there is a difference in terms of how you present and how you communicate, and always being glass half full. I don't know, I've not got any kids, but my understanding is that kids in America, I mean, at the age of 6 or 7, they're all being taught like performance and confidence classes and all this kind of stuff. Now, you could argue that that's not so good for our introverted children and whatnot, but that's probably another debate. But I think what does happen with that is that you do have a culture that looks for ways of framing things through a positive lens, and actually looks at, especially now, has started to look at questions of, how are you framing so-called you know, disadvantaged groups or groups that you want to support. You know, even again, I think there was recently quite a bit of outcry. The new mayor of New York used the language low skill workers, and he was vilified for it, because actually what he meant was low wage workers, right, or low paid workers. Now, if you're low wage or you're low paid, doesn't necessarily equate to being low skilled, right? You know, like our waitresses, our cleaners, our nannies, you know, who are all typically low paid in our society. And again, that's a question for another day, but they are not low skilled. They are skilled at what they do. So I think there is something about, you know, how in British culture we are maybe looking at our so-called challenging or more disadvantaged groups in our society, and just making sure that we're using positive, uplifting language to describe them. Because I know something, I don't want to be described as a neat or as something else. I mean, and I wouldn't want my kids being described that. So I don't think there's anyone out there who wants their kids described as that, whether their kids are in education or employment or not. So why are we using this kind of language? It's just because it's easy for professionals working in the space to quickly categorize and understand something. But that doesn't mean then you should be using that language to communicate with people.
That's very, I knew we'd get loads of food for thought from you, Steve, and that's what we're getting. I'm going to hit you, we've got limited time, so I'm going to give you another real juicy question. I think people are starting to realize more that you can't put people into certain demographic homogenous boxes and expect them all to behave the same way. Talk to me about intersectionality, about how obviously people fit into an infinite number of boxes. Nobody's neat and tidy in one box, but that doesn't work for organizations and for marketeers who love to have everything neatly segmented. And demographics, ABC1 and all the rest of it are very convenient for the marketeer, but that ain't real life, is it? And there's harms to that. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, man. I mean, and I definitely don't claim to be an expert on intersectionality, but what I do know is that you know, we as human beings are constantly evolving, and I feel becoming better at how we exist, right? I mean, let's control for the fact that we're destroying the planet and we don't want to pay people properly sometimes, but you know, overall we're good. And I think what we've got to do from the perspective of kind of, you know, marketeers or comms and appreciating the fact that we are now so much more than, you know, an A1, a B1. It's just be really curious about that stuff and be prepared to want to, you know, analyze and understand the different permutations of people, and recognize that. And maybe some of this is about going back to some of those basic classifications that we've been using to categorize and understand people and say, well, actually, these need to be so much more sophisticated, right? Because, you know, we have so many characteristics that define us, and you know, and in a way as well, most of us are, you know, usually there's some ethnicity to us. You know, usually there's some either perceived or real gender perception we have of ourselves. You know, in some way or another, most of us, especially you start to get older, are living with some kind of ailment or disability or illness. So I think we've just got to be more sophisticated and curious. I think we've got to work harder on that stuff. I think as well, what we need to see is, you know, if people are working in marketing and comms and these spaces, we need to start seeing more diverse people being hired to work on this stuff, right? So, you know, what I'm trying to say is that I don't necessarily have the answer, but I know that there are certain things that we can do that will help us get more sophisticated about how we build intersectionality into our comms work in a more effective way. So for me, one of them is just like be more curious and be prepared to like hear these stories, hear these different characteristics, hear people's different descriptors of themselves. Two, we need to hire more people with diverse and intersectional characteristics into communication roles, because they're going to help us to solve and develop the approach. And yeah, you know, I mean, I can't think what else, but I think those two things are key. You know, we've got to be more curious. We've got to be hiring more people into the work, and I think we've just got to be practicing. Right, we've got to be practicing. Like, what does it mean to communicate intentionally to people who recognize themselves through a multitude of lenses? You know, I think that's important. I think it's hard. I think it's especially hard if, you know, some of us have come of age in a time when, you know, all there really was white, black, male, female, you know, whatever else. It's just like, well, no, you know, things have evolved, and we need to respect that and engage with that. So that would be my response.
Steve, I know it's 8:30 in the morning. You've probably not even had your first or second cup of coffee. I just want to say thank you for the opening remarks for our event. We'll get the recording to you afterwards, and maybe we can follow up with you afterwards and take questions from people and forward them to you if they have any for you. But just want to wish you well and say thank you for opening the event with those remarks. There's so much food for thought, and thank you.
No, appreciate you, Ben, and yeah, I hope you have a fantastic event. And yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity to talk, and love the work you're doing, and good luck with it all.